Dr. Pon, you say we're live, is it?
Yes, we are live, yes.
All right. Okay. Well, wonderful. Here we go with another APMEN talk. Very warm welcome to everyone. And thank you for setting aside time to join our APMENxChange talk today. APMEN, as you probably well know by now, is an acronym standing for the Asia Pacific Malaria Elimination Network. And it is a not-for-profit organization with a mandate to support the malaria elimination objectives of its 22 member states across Asia Pacific. And APMEN partners with the Asia Pacific Leaders Malaria Alliance, APALMA. Our webinar today is going to focus on surveillance and prevention of re-establishment of malaria after initial elimination has been achieved. We're very fortunate to have 5 experts to share the insights with us. A couple of the presentations come from Southern Africa, where certain practices have relevance for us here in Asia. We're all in the same boat when it comes to fighting malaria, and we can learn from each other. So it's a spread of presentations, each with its own lessons. We thank our speakers for their generous time in preparing and presenting these talks. So sincere thanks, Alkan, Champa, Basil, Jayashri, and Kim. We appreciate it genuinely. Just briefly, some comments on the webinar process. As mentioned, we will have 5 PowerPoint presentations back to back, and this will be followed by the usual question and answer session. Our audience members can submit written questions during the presentations. Please use the question box, not the chat box, please. And I suggest you precede your question with the name of the panel member that you would like to respond to your question. So for example, Kim, and then your question. After the Q&A session, there's a very short poll. It's quick, 1 minute of your time, but it helps us, and I'd be grateful if you can just quickly tick those boxes. Very simple and straightforward and short. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available on the APMEN and ORIN websites within a day or so. And the details of these sites will be made available on your screens at some stage during the event. So let's move on to our speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Alkan Gasimov, who's going to talk to us on development of the global guidance on prevention of malaria transmission re-establishment. Alkan joined the WHO country office in Azerbaijan in 2000, and then from 2015 to 2022, he led the WHO regional office's work on malaria and neglected tropical diseases. In April last year, 2022, Dr. Gasimov joined the Global Malaria Program in WHO headquarters as head of the Malaria Elimination Unit. So please, audience members, I suggest pay special attention here. Alkan is responsible for coordination of the work on developing policy recommendations and strategies on elimination and prevention of malaria transmission re-establishment, and also for guiding and supporting countries through the last mile of elimination, tracking progress, identifying and resolving bottlenecks of elimination, and supporting the process of WHO certification of malaria-free status. So clearly, Alkan is the key contact point at WHO for our Asian countries and all other countries that are approaching elimination. Very worthwhile person to keep in your address book. Thank you for your time, Alkan. I'm going to hand over to you, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you, Alkan. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Leo. It is a great pleasure to be in this meeting. Thank you very much for the invitation. And as you mentioned, I will have a presentation describing the development of the global guidance on POR and where we are at the moment. So let me share my presentation now. Can you see my screen?
It looks good, Arkan. I think proceed. It looks all good.
Okay, good. So good afternoon, colleagues. I would like to start my presentation with the global technical strategy on malaria for the years 2016-2030. This GTS was adopted by the World Health Assembly in 2015 and was updated and endorsed again by World Health Assembly in 2021. So this is a key document, I would say, even for the entire malaria community in the world, because it sets also the milestone and targets until the end of 2030. And the reason I'm showing this is that one of the goals of the global technical strategy is to prevent the establishment of malaria transmission in all countries that are malaria free. Now, out of globally, 100 countries are already malaria free. Out of 92 endemic countries, 42 reported less than 10,000 cases. More and more countries are moving towards elimination. In the period from 2000 to 2021, number of countries reporting less than 10 cases increased from 4 in 2000 to 25 in 2021. This shows that the number of countries which are dealing or will be dealing with prevention of reestablishment is really a lot. So there are more and more countries dealing and engaging into this area. So this year, we initiated development of the global guidance on prevention of reestablishment. And then looking back, I can say that there are several documents where prevention of reestablishment to some extent is already mentioned or described. So one of the documents I would like to mention is Framework for Malaria Elimination, which was developed and published by WHO in 2017. And the section, chapter 4, is related to and devoted to prevention of reestablishment of malaria. In 2018, WHO developed and published Malaria Surveillance, Monitoring and Evaluation Manual, the reference manual, which also in different sections described surveillance during prevention of reestablishment, entomological surveillance in different settings, including prevention of transmission, and recommended indicators on continuum to elimination, including indicators on prevention of reestablishment. Last year, a new set of guidelines, WHO guidelines were published in June, and for the first time, these guidelines included interventions in the final phase of elimination and prevention of reestablishment. We have another manual called Preparing for Certification of Malaria Elimination. The second edition was, the first edition was published in 2020 and the second edition in 2022. And in the Annex 5, there is a checklist of elements for prevention of reestablishment of malaria transmission. And this is important for certification because one of the areas certification team is looking is availability and of the plan for prevention of reestablishment. Now, there are a few other documents which were published earlier. For example, there was guidance on prevention of reestablishment published in Eastern Mediterranean region in 2007. There was a regional framework on prevention of reestablishment of malaria transmission and certification of malaria elimination published in the European region. And having all these documents, the question is why we decided to go with development of the global guidance. The reason is that even though prevention of reestablishment is mentioned in all these documents which I mentioned, but these guidance and kind of recommendations are fragmented in some points, in some documents, very superficial, doesn't go really very much into details. And in some documents, particularly those developed in previous years, it is just a description of how it should be or what should be in the country in order to prevent reestablishment. For example, there was lines like, the country has to ensure funding for prevention of reestablishment. Surveillance should cover the entire country. Entomological surveillance should be in place. So these are not exactly recommendations, and this is not exactly the guidance we countries actually need from WHO. So with this in mind, we, as I said, in 2023 this year, early this year, we launched a technical consultation on prevention of reestablishment of malaria transmission, and the goal is to review and update current WHO guidance on POR to support countries' efforts to maintain malaria-free status at the national and subnational level. So this technical consultation was launched during the Global Forum of Malaria Eliminating Countries, which we conducted in Cape Town in South Africa on 24-26 January of this year. And the last day, the half day, there was a special session devoted to prevention of reestablishment and launch of this initiative. And we have a plan on activities. As I mentioned, of activities, with the final goal to develop the document. So official launch took place in Cape Town. The next step for us was to conduct a series of virtual meetings to review case studies and updates on WHO policies and recommendations on health system from 7 countries. So we had these sessions on 21st, 23rd February. And we really learned from 7 countries: Greece, Paraguay, Sri Lanka, Oman, Mauritius, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Georgia, how they maintain malaria-free status. So some of these countries are certified, like Paraguay, like Sri Lanka, Uzbekistan, and now I can say that Tajikistan was also certified just last week. And some of them are not certified, but still they, like Greece, for example, or Oman, they still maintain malaria-free status. It was a very rich discussions, and countries provided like very detailed information on different aspects related to policies, related to vector control, related to case management, surveillance, etc. So we covered the entire experience of countries, and based on these experiences, we moved to our next stage of development of the guidance. We also commissioned different institutions to support us with literature reviews. So one of the literature reviews was a gray literature review was on factors that contribute to resurgence of malaria after elimination is achieved, and factors that might contribute to the stability of malaria elimination in countries that achieved interruption of transmission. Another institution which we commissioned to conduct a review on refractoriness of Plasmodium infections in Anopheles species and biological factors that could result in refractoriness. Why the subject is important? Because particularly in European region, we know that despite continuous importation of Plasmodium falciparum malaria and presence of malaria vectors, and there is no resurgence of malaria or reestablishment of malaria, falciparum malaria transmission. It is generally accepted that the vectors which are in Europe are not susceptible to Plasmodium falciparum. So we want to also check that that aspect, because that can also influence and have impact on prevention of reestablishment or reestablishment of malaria transmission. So also based on the presentations from countries, some synthesized case studies from country presentations were also developed. And the last stage at this moment, last week, we conducted an evidence review meeting in Tbilisi with almost 30, close to 30 participants, with different experts, with different consultants, country presentations, regional offices, And the objective was to review the zero draft of the global guidance on prevention of reestablishment, and provide us as a secretariat on the areas which needs to be updated, on the areas which have to be included, which we omitted. And the meeting took place in Tbilisi, in Georgia. It was a very interesting, very heavy discussions we had. And now the secretariat is working on the next draft of the global guidance, which is we hope that, and we are planning to complete the first draft by June, latest July, which also will be shared by with consultants, with colleagues, with experts for review. Another version after the review is planned to be completed by October of this year, and the goal is to go ahead and publish the global guidance on POR in December of this year. Now, as I said, now this all according to our work plan, we completed 3 steps now. The technical consultation was launched, virtual meetings were conducted, evidence review meeting is completed, and we are now at the stage of development of the document. Thank you very much. That is very briefly what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Alkan, thank you. That's a very concise and punchy presentation, brimful with excellent information, wonderful overview of the resources that are available already, the various guideline documents, etc. So it's wonderful for our audience to be reminded of the availability of these documents, and very reassuring to see that you're hard in the process, engaged in the process of updating or preparing additional guidelines. And we wish you luck with the finalization of the global guidelines to be published in December. Well done, Alkan. I have no doubt our audience is going to ask you questions during Q&A session, but thank you for your time, Alkan. Much appreciated. So next up is going to be Professor Basil Brook, who will give us an overview of risk and receptivity, malaria vector surveillance in an elimination setting. Basil is head of the Vector Control Reference Laboratory at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases in South Africa. His research work has primarily focused on identifying the entomological drivers of malaria transmission, especially insecticide resistance, but also vector species assemblages and their component behavioral and physiological traits. He also works on enhanced vector surveillance techniques, operational procedures for malaria outbreak response, new vector control products, and alternative methods of control. Professor Brook regularly works with WHO and UNEP on technical issues relating to malaria vector control policy and practice, and serves on various national and regional committees as part of the drive towards malaria elimination. Basil, thank you for making yourself available. We look forward to your presentation. Thank you for your time. Over to you, Basil.
Thank you very much, Leo, and good morning or good afternoon, colleagues, wherever you are, and thank you for this opportunity to present this presentation. So I'm going to be quite quick. I'm just going to talk about some of the vector control and surveillance issues from a South African perspective, given that we are on an elimination agenda. but also facing the problem of the fact that we are bordered by countries that are highly endemic for malaria. And because of the importation issue, because of our fairly porous borders, elimination is going to be a very challenging thing for us to achieve currently. But nevertheless, we'll move on. So now it doesn't want to, let me try that. It doesn't want to advance. It was working fine earlier.
Yeah, I think be patient for a moment. Give your computer a minute to think a bit. Let's see if it works. Otherwise, we may have to stop share.
I think I'm going to stop share and start again.
Okay, that's a good idea. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
See this time around.
There we go. Okay, now it's working fine. Can you hear me okay?
All clear. Thank you, Basil. Please proceed.
All right. I thought it might be safer if I switch my video off. It just might make the bandwidth video to work.
Fair enough. Yeah, thanks, Basil.
Okay, so obviously we know that malaria can only abide through the infectious bite of an Anopheles mosquito, which is a bit of a conundrum in itself, given that other genera of mosquitoes can transmit some of the non-human malarias. But then, of course, when we're talking about risk and receptivity for malaria, we're really talking about the presence of Anopheles vector populations. And here in Southern Africa, we've really had a habit, I suppose, of classifying these species as either major or secondary malaria vectors. But it's a fairly loose classification system. It doesn't have very well-defined parameters. It really depends on their levels of contribution to malaria transmission. So, for example, in South Africa, we've identified 5 Anopheles species to date, which are directly implicated as malaria vectors within our borders. So 2 of these are what we call the major vectors, Anopheles fenestus and Anopheles arabiensis. Anopheles fenestus is a huge problem for us because it is probably one of the most efficient, if not the most efficient vector of malaria in the sub-Saharan African region. Its habit of multiple blood feeding means that it can create a very high level of transmission very quickly. And so it is fundamentally important for us to control that particular species. But we also have these others. As I said, we have Anopheles arabiensis, a highly or very well-established vector through much of the Southern African and in fact the sub-Saharan African region. But we also have what we call secondary vectors. I've listed them there, Anopheles phaneardeni, Parensis, Mirus. And we call those secondary vectors because they interact with human communities certainly to a lesser extent than the major vectors. They are generally rarer based on the surveillance information that we have. They seem to be less susceptible to Plasmodium infections, and that might be because they don't necessarily or preferentially feed on human hosts. And those make them comparatively inefficient vectors, but nevertheless contributors to the malaria transmission patterns that we receive. However, there are some areas in which they can play prominent roles in malaria transmission. The most notable example there is really Anopheles mirus, where data from Tanzania, for example, showed that Anopheles mirus is the predominant vector and the biggest problem causer, if you like, in parts of coastal Tanzania. So you can never ignore what we call secondary vectors when it comes to operational planning and operational research. So when I started working in this field, the hypothesis was and still is that probably all Anopheles species have at least the potential to transmit malaria. And the most important determinant, of course, of whether they are a vector species or not depends really on their interaction with humans. But there are other important determinants as well. Their feeding habits. Some are specialized feeders, like Anopheles fenestus, really seldom feed on anything other than human beings. Some are very generalist feeders. The timing and frequency of blood feeding is very important. Their relative level of immunity to malaria infections is obviously very important, their level of refractoriness, if you like. Their relative density abundance is obviously important, and that tends to vary by season. In Southern Africa, for example, malaria is very seasonal because our vector populations are generally low density during the dry winter months. The average longevity of adult females is, of course, very important because it is only the older females that actually transmit malaria. And so the number of gonotrophic cycles they are able to complete is a critical determinant as well. So assessing risk and receptivity that was previously endemic for disease is going to involve regular or at least periodic surveillance. I mean, that's how we're seeing it from the Southern African perspective. Because we need to understand the risk of reestablishment, given that importation of malaria is a particularly critical issue for us. So parasite importation occurs, at least in South Africa, mainly via cross-border movement of infected persons, and usually they are only mildly symptomatic or almost entirely asymptomatic, but can nevertheless carry high enough parasite loads to enable onward transmission. So when we're thinking about what is the level of risk of a resurgence of malaria, how receptive is perhaps an area that was cleared up or previously cleared up, how receptive is it to malaria? We really need to think carefully about what sort of surveillance methods we employ to make that assessment. And in this region, we use quite a wide range of mosquito collection methods, from the very simple idea of presenting yourself as a target for mosquitoes to come and bite, through to using various kinds of baited net traps and tents, to providing indoor and outdoor shelters for mosquitoes to rest in, from which they can be subsequently collected, to using standardized techniques like light traps or exit window traps. And various unexpected things like discarded tires are often very good places to find Anopheles mosquitoes. And of course, you can always try and collect them indoors by looking for them while they rest on walls or under the eaves during the day as well. So we use a wide range of methods to do this kind of surveillance so that we don't miss any vector species populations or vector populations that are present in an area. And the indicators we are most interested in are, of course, the Anopheles species assemblage. We want to know about their insecticide susceptibility, given that we rely heavily on IRS as our method of control. Insecticide susceptibility is a critical indicator for us, but we also want to know about their feeding behaviors, their resting behaviors, and their breeding behaviors. And all of this information is really to assess the risk of reestablishment, because it can be used for vector control planning operations. So appropriate insecticide choice would be the main one. Method is also critical. And what we can do then is we can look at areas and decide if we want a proactive or a reactive vector control strategy, certainly in an area that is cleared up or in a post or pre and post elimination setting. So of course we have the foci clearing protocols, which are I think a critical set of protocols to have for a country that is nearing elimination or is in a post elimination scenario. So that routine vector control may be implemented, or we might have a reactive targeted approach. And as I said, the method of control can be designed depending on the level of risk inferred. One of the critical issues we also need to think about, in addition to the importation, the ordinary importation of malaria parasites into the country, is another route of parasite importation, and that is via infectious mosquitoes. This happens quite frequently here in South Africa, where infectious mosquitoes are able to hitchhike, usually by land transport, or air transport. It's something we call Odyssean malaria. And they are able to use or inadvertently use these modes of transport to travel very, very long distances. So this tends to result in local transmission of one or a small number of persons who are in non-endemic areas or cleared up areas that have no recent travel history to an endemic region. So South Africa's Gauteng province, which is non-endemic for malaria, records up to about 15 Odyssean malaria cases per year. It can be more than that. And if you have a look at the little table on the right, you can see that from 1996 to date, we've had about 166 of these cases that have been recorded. But what's really important there is the very high case fatality rate. It's especially high because often these cases result in misdiagnosis or missed diagnosis. And so it's something we're very conscious of. But because we get these cases in a non-endemic province, it's reasonable to assume that we also get these kinds of cases in the endemic provinces as well. But of course, they cannot be distinguished from ordinary local malaria. So from the investigations we've done, what seems most likely is that these infectious mosquitoes are imported on long distance modes of transport. It could be cars, taxis, buses, trains. They can just get into that mode of transport itself. They can even get into somebody's suitcase and travel that way. That seems to happen too. We do entomological investigations when we are notified of these cases, but of course, by the time we get the notification, the infectious bite happened 3 weeks to a month prior to that. And so we are not expecting to find the culprit mosquito. What we are, though, looking for is any sign of Anopheles breeding, which could lead to the establishment, especially in the warmer summer months, of a small Anopheles population, which could cause onward transmission. We've never found breeding to date, but if breeding was established at the index house or in its near vicinity, then of course we might indicate or might recommend some vector control measures and personal protection measures. I mean, those are always recommended anyway. But our standard response is community outreach in terms of information on signs and symptoms and personal protection. And we alert all health facilities to make sure that malaria is always considered as a differential diagnosis in patients with unexplained fever. And what's especially important about that advisory is that it should be, even if they don't have a recent travel history to an endemic area. So as I mentioned earlier, misdiagnosis or missed diagnosis is a huge problem for us when it comes to Odyssean malaria. It causes an unusually high case fatality rate. And so those advisories are really, really important. We don't currently do insecticidal treatment of vehicles at border crossings simply because of the logistical problem of trying to treat so many tens, probably hundreds of thousands of vehicles in the hope of catching, a handful of infectious mosquitoes. So as I said, the main advisory, if you look at the bottom right figure there, malaria should be actively sought in febrile patients in whom there's no obvious cause of fever, even if their travel history is not suggestive. So that's all from me. So thank you very much. And of course, I'll be open to questions when we get there. Thank you very much.
Basil, thank you so much. I see there are a number of comments from the chat box as well, people thanking you for a very interesting and very useful presentation to make people aware again of what should we be measuring as indicators during vector surveillance, making us aware again of the risks associated with mosquitoes traveling from a malaria endemic country to a recently cleared country by way of buses and taxis or trains or whatever. So a good number of very useful, important factors that you pointed out there. I should also mention to our audience, pretty much everything that is known about secondary vectors or non-funestus, non-arabiensis vectors in South Africa, Southern Africa, is due to the work done by yourself and your staff in your lab. So please keep up the very good work you're doing there. Basil, thank you for your great presentation. No doubt there will be questions coming your way during Q&A, but let's move on to Jayshree. Dr. Jayshree Rahman will be sharing with us some of the valuable experience being generated in South Africa on detection and response to especially imported malaria. South Africa is close to reaching malaria elimination, but they are already implementing measures that would be relevant for post-elimination and that we could benefit from taking note of. So Jayshree will talk about breaking the malaria transmission cycle by expanding malaria services to mobile and hard to reach populations. Very relevant to us here in Asia. Jayshree is a molecular biologist and head of the Laboratory for Anti-Malarial Resistance Monitoring and Malaria Operational Research. That forms the acronym ARMOR, which is at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases in South Africa. And this robust ARMOR surveillance program enables near real-time tracking of emerging resistance to inform case management policy and prompt containment response. So Dr. Rahman's lab is currently investigating novel techniques and technologies aimed at improving malaria case detection and treatment practices to achieve malaria elimination. Jayshree, again, thank you for agreeing to participate. We look forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Leo, for the invitation. It's an absolute pleasure to present, and I look forward to sharing some of my experiences. I am sitting in the field at the moment, so I'm going to switch off my video so that we have great enough bandwidth, but hopefully everything else works fine. So thank you very much. And I'm going to hopefully tell you some things that we are doing in South Africa that might help get elimination closer to in Southeast Asia. So just to orientate everybody about where South Africa lies. So South Africa lies on the southernmost limits of malaria distribution in Africa. So that means that only certain regions of the country are exposed to malaria, and it's really only the northeastern regions of the country that are endemic to malaria, which makes malaria very seasonal, as Prof. Brooks pointed out, but also it makes malaria a high-risk outbreak region within Southern Africa and South Africa specifically. So if you look more in detail at the spread of malaria in South Africa, like I said, it was limited to the northeastern regions of Southern Africa or South Africa. And initially, this is a risk map from the 1930s, and malaria spread really quite far down to Gauteng, which Prof. Brooks has just mentioned was not really an area that is endemic to malaria, but we have seasonal outbreaks there. But due to very sustained effective malaria control interventions, which primarily consisted of indoor residual spraying with a little bit of larviciding, obviously rapid diagnostic detection of malaria cases and effective treatment, malaria really has been pushed back in South Africa, and now it's just limited the shared border regions of 3 provinces, which are Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and KwaZulu-Natal, and they share the borders with Eswatini, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. So despite us having these very limited spread of malaria in these 3 regions, malaria is very heterogeneous in these 3 provinces. And here I'm showing you a spread of cases from 1980 to 2020. And as you can see, each of the colored bars is a different province. And from 1980 to 2000, the major most cases would be 1 province, which was KwaZulu-Natal. We had an outbreak in about 2000, which was due to both resistance to the sulfoxaflor pyrimethine, so we had drug resistance parasites, and we had mosquitoes that were resistant to pyrethroids, and that caused a major outbreak. Then we reintroduced Artemisia lumefantrine, DDT was reintroduced, and the case numbers dropped significantly in the 3 provinces, but also the transmission intensity changed. And instead of KwaZulu-Natal being the major contributor to the cases, the province in orange, which is Limpopo, accounted for most of the cases, but there was really a dropping of cases. And then in 2012, South Africa officially adopted an elimination agenda, and we've seen generally a decreasing number of cases, with the exception of 2017, when there was a regional outbreak of malaria in Southern Africa. But despite having these really effective interventions, including IRS, really prompt detection and treatment, you can see we've got really low numbers. But in 2000, we haven't been able to walk the last mile to get to elimination. And South Africa, like many countries in Southeast Asia, faces really some very significant challenges. And the first being is that South Africa, being on the southernmost fringe of malaria in Africa, is bordered by countries that have much higher burdens. And these are the figures from the 2022 malaria report, which gives you an indication of the range of malaria burden in the countries in Southern Africa. So South Africa reported just under 3,000 cases in 2021, but we bordered by Mozambique, which reported in excess of 10,000 cases. We have DRC, which is a little higher up, but have 30,000 cases. So there is a complete heterogeneity of malaria cases, and so that means trying to eliminate in one country when you're bordered by another country which has a much higher burden is a bigger challenge. And this is a real big challenge because there is a lot of people movement across the region. So this was some mapping done by colleagues in Southampton in 2014, which just tracked the movement of people within Southern Africa through formal borders. And as you can see, there's a phenomenal amount of movement, particularly into South Africa and the economic hubs of South Africa. And as if COVID has taught us anything, people movement equals movement of diseases, particularly infectious diseases. So we know definitely with these people movement, you're going to get the movement of parasites, as Brooks has also just alluded to. And besides the movement through the formal borders, which is something you can sort of control and monitor, South Africa and the Southern African region is notorious for having incredibly porous borders. And so to give you an example of this is an informal border post or crossing between Mozambique and South Africa. And this is the border post. It is not manned. People can cross between. So the market side is Mozambique, and on this side, which is where I was standing when I took the picture, is South Africa. And people routinely just cross this border, which means they could also be crossing this border regularly with malaria parasites. When we suggested this, people didn't think this was very true. So we did an investigation where we monitored the people moving through this border post. And what we found, 97% of all the cases from this particular area were detected at this border post, and they were mainly asymptomatic carriers. So if you did no border screening at this particular population, you were going to miss asymptomatic carriers that were going to go into receptive areas, and then we're probably going to seed malaria. So learning from an example from Southeast Asia, where you had border posts along countries that had varying transmission intensities, many countries, including South Africa, started doing something which was border screening of mobile and hard to reach populations. And it really was an effort to increase malaria services to these populations to make sure that they would get prompt treatment, and also that we would protect South African populations from getting malaria infections through to secondary transmission. So basically what we've done is at these informal border posts, we have set up, and we haven't set up formal border posts, so they are not static units, but they are rather mobile units that moved from one area to another where they know there's informal crossings, or if there's a new place where hard to reach populations are going to be camping, they will set up a tent where they offer malaria screening by rapid diagnostic test, and anyone that is found to be positive will be treated on site with an ACT, and those that are eligible also get single low dose Primaquine, which is transmission blocking. So we're trying to make sure that they get treated. We stop any form of malaria developing into a full-blown malaria incident. And we also are giving them Primaquine to make sure that we reduce the chance of onward transmission. We also take detailed travel history so that we can actually find out where sources or sinks are so that we can identify and put in interventions to stop a sink area or a source area. And additionally, we also take dry blood spots from everyone that will consent, and this is for downstream analysis, and this is really may need to track drug and diagnostic resistance. So while we are very aware this is not going to track or catch all the asymptomatic carriers, we have put in another intervention, but this has proved to be particularly effective among the countries within 8 countries within Southern Africa, where we've put a range of border clinics on the shared border region. And when it started, the intervention started in about 2015, you can see there were many areas that, for example, that were red or yellow, which had much, much higher transmission intensities. And this is a map from 2020 when we did the last evaluation. And you can see the malaria incidence in most of the border regions has decreased significantly, helping these regions get much closer to the elimination targets than before this intervention was put in. And this is some unpublished data from Prof. Barnes, who led the sulfadoxine pyrimethamine, the single low dose primaquine intervention. And what we can see, as soon as we've added primaquine, and if you look at the orange bars, and we did this in 2 districts, one in KwaZulu-Natal and one in Mpumalanga, as soon as single low dose primaquine was added, though we didn't have a major impact, particularly on the total number of cases that was reported in there. What you can definitely see, there was a significant decrease in the number of local cases, which is the orange bar. This definitely showed us that being able to track this population of hard to reach individuals that were carrying asymptomatic malaria and treating them with single low dose primaquine, we had a major impact on decreasing local transmission in these eliminating districts. And I think this is definitely important if you're getting towards elimination, but it probably is going to be more critical once you're trying to prevent reintroduction, to make sure that anyone coming into your country with parasites has no chance of seeding secondary transmission. So, as I said, we were very aware that while this border screening is very effective, we were going to miss some of the cases that were possibly going to come in. And Prof. Brooks also did mention this. We did the foci clearing program. This was a very intense program of enhanced surveillance, and this was really trying to track any malaria carriers in districts or areas or a locality. So it depended on which area you're working on. It could be a district, a village, or a specific locality that was very close to elimination. So we put this foci clearing program in specific areas in a locality or a foci locality that reported less than 5 cases over the past 3 seasons, but we knew that was receptive. So what we did was, because malaria is a notifiable case condition in South Africa, which requires every malaria case to be notified within 24 hours of diagnosis and investigated within 48 hours. What we did as part of the foci clearing program is, as soon as a case is notified and investigated and confirmed as local, we would send out what we call is our malaria SWAT team. And this has a group of case investigators, an entomological team, let's go back, IRS team, and health promotion experts who go to the house where there's a local case. And in the index house, they speak to the index case, confirm the classification, that is, they take again a detailed travel history to make sure it was a local case. The index case is then assessed to make sure that they have complied with the treatment and they are getting better. Then all the contacts in the house, the index house that is, are tested by rapid diagnostic test. If anyone is found to be malaria positive, they are treated on site, both with an ACT and single low dose primaquine. Dry blood spots are also collected for assessment of subpatent carriage, so that is a commuter site carriage, as well as subpatent malaria carriage, and also drug and diagnostic resistance. In addition, entomological investigations are conducted. If there are adult mosquitoes that are found or breeding sites, they are treated appropriately. So we're just trying to make sure that there's no chance of transmission occurring should a malaria positive person happen. But just focusing on the index house was not enough. We did expand it a little bit more. So we also went to neighboring houses, and then there were 9 to 12 houses within a radius of 500 meters. That was just an arbitrary decision that we took following discussions with Prof. Book and other vector control experts that said mosquitoes won't fly further than they have to get the next blood meal. So we chose 500 meters as the maximum distance. In the neighboring houses, we collected blood smears as well as dry blood spots, and this was for safe subpatent or asymptomatic carriage, as well as gametocyte carriage assessment. The molecular or blood smear analysis, if anyone was found to have parasites or gametocytes, then they were notified as a malaria case and treated with artemether lumefantrine and single-low dose primaquine. And then also trying to meet the WHO target of ensuring we assess drug efficacy in everybody that's treated with with an ACT in an elimination areas. All people that are found to be malaria positive are followed up on day 7 with a dry blood spot collected, and anyone that's found to be positive to ensure that they have cleared parasites, and also on day 28 to ensure that there is no reinfection. And we're hoping that these two interventions of the enhanced border screening, as well as having this enhanced surveillance in the communities close to these border areas, will get us closer to malaria elimination. So in conclusion, what I'd like to say is that increasing access to malaria services, particularly to the hard to reach and mobile populations, as well as adding single-dose primaquine, is critical. And we've definitely found this in South Africa for decreasing or halting local transmission. The other thing is that you definitely need to have a very strong responsive surveillance system that is able to detect upsurges and able to respond. So you need to have a sensitive system that is really well resourced. And without a doubt, having cross-border collaborations is an absolute must. Without this, it is going to be impossible to eliminate malaria in countries that are bordered, bordering countries that have a much higher malaria burden. And with that, I'd just like to thank all the funders, and hopefully if we get everything right, we will be able to draw a line against malaria and live in a malaria-free world soon. Thank you very much.
Jayashree, I think we all echo those sentiments, the closing statements you made about a malaria-free world. Slowly but steadily, we're plugging away with successes to keep our incentives up and our enthusiasm going. But what a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Jayashree. And you get 5 stars on your forehead for a job well done in South Africa for the marvelous work going on at the border crossing sites. Very impressive stuff you mentioned there. You know, you were talking about reporting and then response within 48 hours, and then looking at clearance within 7 days. Even tighter follow-up and response than the 137 famous example that our China colleagues developed. So well done, Jayashree. There's some very important takeaway points. And the one that struck me was, you know, malaria transmission, or the dribble of asymptomatic and other cases across borders is not homogeneous across a large landscape, but you've got to try and go and detect the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 prime spots which account for the majority of asymptomatic infected people crossing over into your country. And it probably makes your life a lot simpler and far more effective if you can just invest in some resources to go and identify those key critical spots. But for a wonderful overview, Jayashree, excellent. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. I'm sure our audience agrees. So we also have the privilege to have with us today Dr. Kim Lindblade, highly experienced, and who will share with us insights on integrated post-elimination surveillance for malaria and neglected tropical diseases. Kim is the technical director for the PMI Insights project and senior technical advisor to the PATH Malaria and Neglected Tropical Diseases Department. She's based in Geneva. As former head of the Malaria Elimination Unit for WHO, that was 2017 to 2022, Kim oversaw the development of the first WHO malaria elimination guidelines and supported countries in all regions of the world in their efforts to eliminate malaria. Dr. Lindblade has supported control of influenza in, I know influenza is not quite malaria, I'm just trying to give you an idea of the range of her expertise. Influenza in Thailand and Laos, and the response to the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. She led evaluations of malaria interventions while chief of the Malaria Epidemiology Unit at the CDC KEMRI program in Kenya, and as head of the Strategic and Applied Sciences Unit of the CDC Malaria Branch. So in short, Kim has a wealth of experience and knowledge to share, and it's our privilege now to listen to some of this experience coming from Kim. Over to you, Kim. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Leo. That was a very nice introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Clear, very clear. Thank you, Kim.
Great. Well, thank you for the invitation from APMEN to be able to present to you today. And it's been a real pleasure to hear the preceding talks from Elkan, Basil, and Jayshree, and really happy to be a part of this group today. I'm going to change focus a little bit to talk about what happens after elimination for malaria and neglected tropical diseases, and in particular, how malaria might be able to partner with neglected tropical diseases to improve the sustainability of surveillance in the post-elimination period. So we've heard a number of talks about malaria and the difficulty both in achieving elimination, but also then in preventing reestablishment of malaria, and that's the topic that we're discussing today. And malaria is one of those diseases that you can't take your eyes off of even for a second, because as soon as there is any decrease in control efforts, malaria has a tendency to bounce back very quickly. And there's an unfortunate but ultimately successful example of that in your region, in Sri Lanka, that worked very hard during the global malaria eradication program in the 1950s to reduce transmission in their country, and succeeded very well. By the early 1960s, there was probably just a dozen cases left in Sri Lanka. And as a result, the country began to scale back its vector control activities, its surveillance activities, and to put their efforts into other diseases that were more of a burden at that time. But as a result, there was a substantial increase in transmission, and between 1967 and 1968, Sri Lanka accounted for more than 1.5 million cases. So going from just about a dozen to 1.5 million in a few years showed how resilient the malaria transmission system is. And that led to another 50 years of transmission in Sri Lanka before they were ultimately successful in eliminating malaria and then being certified by WHO. So as a result of this recognition that malaria is not a disease that you can just partially eliminate or eliminate as a public health problem, but you have to actually interrupt transmission, WHO changed their criteria for certification around 1973. So prior to 1973, the certification criteria just required that countries be able to prove that they had no more indigenous transmission of malaria, no more local cases occurring. But after 1973, WHO added a criterion around the plan for prevention of reestablishment. So now the countries that are coming up for certification, and as Elkan mentioned just recently, Tajikistan and Azerbaijan, they have to not only show that they have reached elimination, but they have to also demonstrate that they are ready to be able to prevent reestablishment by a number of different actions. And these actions are now being readdressed in the development of new guidance that Elkan mentioned. But as part of the criteria for for certification, countries have to be able to show that they are going to be able to prevent reestablishment of transmission. Now, neglected tropical diseases are also coming up for elimination, and we're making really significant progress on a number of fronts in reducing both the burden and interrupting transmission for some NTDs. So the WHO 2030 roadmap for neglected tropical disease elimination has targeted 2 diseases for eradication, and that is yaws and dracunculiasis, or guinea worm. 3 for interruption of transmission, and that includes leprosy, African trypanosomiasis caused by gambiense, and onchocerciasis, or river blindness. And then 8 NTDs are targeted for elimination as a public health problem. And that means that they will not interrupt transmission, but they will reduce the burden of disease to a threshold that's considered not to be a priority any longer. And so 47 countries to date have eliminated at least 1 NTD, and this is largely achieved through use of chemoprevention or intensified disease case management. Now, like malaria, when NTDs decrease, you see greater heterogeneity in the spatial distribution of disease. And as Jayshree was mentioning, you find high-risk groups that become more prominent. So often these are mobile or migrant populations that might have reduced access to care, or people who are living in hard-to-reach areas who are not able to receive prevention and treatment services. So I think malaria has been quite smart in including this requirement for a plan to prevent reestablishment, but that's not something that's typically been included in the requirements for NTDs. So none of the NTDs that are eliminated either as a public health problem or for interruption of transmission require a plan to prevent reestablishment. And in addition, it's not even very clear for many of these NTDs what we need to be doing in order to detect an early resurgence in one of these diseases. Now, in the APMEN region, there are a number of NTDs that are targeted for elimination. So yaws is occurring in several countries in the region, leprosy in almost all of them. But many of the diseases targeted for elimination as a public health problem are also found in your region, including visceral leishmaniasis, lymphatic filariasis, rabies, schistosomiasis, soil-transmitted helminths, and trachoma. And although we group these all as neglected tropical diseases, they are very different, both in terms of the causal pathogen, whether it's a parasite, a bacteria, or a virus, but in many other important regions, important characteristics as well, including whether asymptomatic infections are important in the transmission cycle, how long it takes from infection to development of symptoms, the different control approaches, case management and diagnostic approaches are all very, very different. And in order to, it's very important after elimination that these countries begin to think about how they're going to conduct surveillance so that they detect signals of recrudescence early enough that they're going to be able to respond and reduce transmission or reduce burden back to the levels that they that are considered to be elimination as a public health problem or elimination of transmission. And similar to malaria, many of these NTDs operated in vertical approaches during the elimination phase. So there were sometimes special programs, vector control or mass chemoprevention programs that operated somewhat separate from the primary healthcare system. And they may also be implemented through a range of other partners, not just the Ministry of Health. And so they're not always as integrated as some aspects of malaria may be. And also, unlike malaria, many of the NTDs do not show signs and symptoms or very mild signs and symptoms during the early infection period, making them very difficult to find in terms of clinical cases. And they often only really show clinical signs and symptoms at a point where it's too late to be able to have any actions to reduce transmission or to reduce development of severe disease. Very similar to malaria, when NTDs are eliminated, there's frequently a loss of funding, particularly because these countries aren't required to have a plan to prevent reestablishment. So the political, the politicians and the finance ministers are not informed or understand that they have to continue to fund activities after elimination in order to prevent these gains from being lost. Now, because of the long timeline between infection and development of symptoms, the post-validation or post-verification surveillance for NTDs could be needed for up to 10 years. Now, unlike malaria, where we talk about certification, for NTDs, we talk about validation or verification because we're not looking for eventual global eradication of many of these NTDs. We're looking for a reduction in transmission or a reduction in the public health burden of disease. So we use slightly different terms. But this period of surveillance during the post-elimination period after validation or verification may be needed for quite a long period of time because of the very long life cycle or clinical picture of many of these NTDs. So one of the possible approaches to helping when the amount of funding for surveillance after elimination is decreased because everyone considers the disease to be gone and not to be a problem anymore, is to consider whether it's possible to integrate this surveillance for NTDs into other existing surveillance platforms. So this is an integrated approach to post-validation or post-verification surveillance for NTDs by looking for opportunities where it makes sense to integrate the surveillance activities into existing platforms. Now, this table shows a number of potential platforms that exist in many countries, ranging from passive surveillance, which is generally operational across all parts of the country through health facilities, through to migrant worker screening programs that many countries have in place. And these are just meant to be examples of different platforms that might be suitable for different NTDs and different aspects of the NTD surveillance in order to identify early signals that could suggest that there's been a resurgence of disease and that then would trigger a response to be able to quickly control transmission and morbidity. So just to give you a couple of examples here in bold are platforms that are also related to malaria. So for example, as Jayshree had mentioned, there's a lot of active surveillance that's undertaken for malaria. Sometimes it's active in terms of reacting to a particular case, but looking for additional cases around an index case. It could also be active in terms of a very distant area that's considered to be receptive. And so there's going to be an active surveillance, active case detection in that area to try and identify malaria cases early. If these platforms are ongoing in a country, particularly a country that hasn't yet achieved elimination, then it may be possible to add additional diseases to that active case detection. So for example, it might be possible to try and detect cases of lymphatic filariasis if there is an overlap in the geographic area that is at risk for malaria and lymphatic filariasis. Another example of integrating active case detection could be leprosy detection campaigns that might also be looking for dermal leishmaniasis. Now, entomological surveillance is an area that's often brought up as a potential platform for integrated surveillance for NTDs and malaria, since in areas that are both looking to eliminate and have eliminated malaria, there is going to be continued entomological surveillance. As Basil mentioned, this is important in order to be able to monitor receptivity and the risk of of ongoing malaria transmission in the area. So these insects that are collected, largely mosquitoes, blood-sucking mosquitoes, many of them may also be vectors of other NTDs. You know, for example, we know many Anopheles species can also transmit lymphatic filariasis and malaria, even in parts of Asia. Oops. But they could also just be useful as a bit of a blood sampler. So a mosquito bites someone and can still pick up some of these pathogens. And so this bycatch, this mosquito that may not be transmitting malaria, but is caught in the traps from malaria, maybe that can still provide us an indication that there is transmission of other diseases, such as lymphatic filariasis. So this is something that there's a lot of interest in understanding how entomological surveillance can be used for xenomonitoring for diseases other than malaria. But there are other platforms as well, including a lot of discussion in Africa about using easy access groups. So women attending antenatal clinics or children attending well child visits, whether blood that may be collected for routine diagnostics and testing as part of those programs could also be reused for other purposes to detect other neglected tropical diseases. And then the migrant worker screening program, in particular, Bhutan has an excellent screening program. Maybe that could be used, well, it actually is already being used to screen for HIV and tuberculosis, but maybe, and malaria, but maybe it could be reused for other NTDs as well in order to take advantage of that platform and integrate NTD surveillance. So I just wanted to give one example of where this has already taken place, but also really to say that integration is not the end. It's not the objective. It is a means to an end. Integration of surveillance activities is meant to reduce the overall cost of surveillance and to make it more sustainable, but only is going to work if it makes sense in terms of the geographic location, in terms of the populations that are being included, and in terms of the additional work that's needed in order to add new activities onto that platform. But this was looked at in particular in Haiti, where there was a transmission assessment survey underway, being planned, to look for lymphatic filariasis cases, and then to be able to determine whether mass drug administration for lymphatic filariasis could be stopped. But on top of that platform that was going to schools in various parts of Haiti, they added on testing for soil transmitted helminths by asking for stool samples from a subsample of the children in the study. And they also examined blood that was taken from children. They used dried blood spots, and they were able to test for malaria. So they had to do some small tweaks to the sampling in order to be able to add on the soil transmitted helminth approach. They only integrated soil transmitted helminths in one of these areas, but they did include malaria in most of them, and they were successful in being able to integrate surveillance for these three, well, soil transmitted helminths is multiple pathogens, but for these these two neglected tropical diseases and malaria, they were successful in integrating them into this platform. It increased the cost of the survey by about 15% to add on malaria, and about 50% to add the cost of the soil transmitted helminth work. But overall, it was significantly less cost than if you had done 3 separate surveys. And the participants, the community members who were participating in the survey felt that it was much less intrusive to have just one study rather than to have 3 separate surveys to look at these diseases individually. So I just wanted to say that this that our interest in post-validation, post-verification surveillance is because we are working on a project with WHO and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to develop a set of guidance documents and tools that will help countries to be able to make decisions about how best to leverage existing or even new platforms to be able to integrate neglected tropical disease surveillance with other disease surveillance programs that are occurring in the country, and to use that to be able to monitor for the resurgence or recrudescence of NTDs. So we are working to identify different approaches to bringing information together. We sort of see this as a 4-step process, where first you have to bring all the information that you have on your neglected tropical diseases and in the past, where they've been occurring, which risk groups were particularly important, what time of year were they more likely to be transmitted, the vector profiles for these different diseases, and then also information on the other potential platforms for surveillance that are occurring in the country and all of their various characteristics. As I mentioned before, the integration, it really depends on these details and understanding what kind of integration is going to make sense in terms of the diseases that you're looking to integrate and their particular characteristics. So this toolkit would help countries more easily integrate and synthesize that information and identify whether there are some potential overlaps in surveillance systems that would be useful in order to integrate NTD surveillance into them. And finally, a set of guidance in order to determine how best to pilot and then implement an integrated surveillance platform in country that would be able to monitor for potential resurgences of NTDs. Just to give you a brief timeline, we hope to begin piloting this toolkit in 3 countries by the end of this year, and hopefully before the end of next year, this will be a toolkit that will be published and countries will be able to use it to begin making decisions about whether it is sensible, appropriate, more efficient, more effective to integrate their post-elimination surveillance for NTDs into other existing platforms, including for malaria. I think this is particularly relevant to the APMEN countries because many of them have malaria embedded in vector control divisions that are also responsible for other vector-borne NTDs, and that might make it more possible to begin considering how to integrate these surveillance systems since everyone is housed in the same shop. So I'd just like to acknowledge some of my coworkers at PATH who have been really instrumental in starting off this project and thinking through the use case for the surveillance toolkit, and thank our funders from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you so much to you too, Leo.
So Kim, thank you for a wonderfully thought-provoking presentation there that goes a little bit beyond just the traditional focus on a single disease. I mean, just focusing on a single disease was scary enough. Your reference to what happened in Sri Lanka, if you take your eye off the ball and rest on your laurels and think the job is done, and you wipe your hands and you sit back, it can rebound on you with frightening consequences. And as you said, it took 50 years to remedy that oversight. We're going to hear more about that from our next speaker, Dr. Champa. But just, Kim, thank you for making us sit back and look at, the opportunities that arise from taking a bit of a broader perspective, a broader view, to see the opportunities that are presented by trying to, combine or use available resources and effort to achieve higher levels of gain by just broadening your perspective a bit to incorporate other diseases. I found it because of a personal fascination, but you did not mention arboviruses. At least I didn't catch that. You may have, but I may have been distracted a moment. And of course, in Asia Pacific, for much of the region, Asia Pacific is very, very fortunate and has made remarkable progress in approaching full elimination within the next handful of years, certainly by 2030, eminently achievable. But as malaria declines, so there is the scary, slow, steady increase in arboviruses, especially dengue, Zika, chikungunya, and so on. And it's a global trend. So here in Asia, dengue is going to be the next malaria. So, we need to start thinking more about these, developing more of a strategic approach to use available resources to embrace a larger set of outcomes, public health outcomes. Kim, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. And we're now going to move to our final presenter. In some ways, the cherry on top in some respects. We will listen to an expert from Sri Lanka, a country that has already achieved malaria elimination and has done an excellent job to maintain that status. How did Sri Lanka do this? To tell us about that long and frustrating journey, Kim made reference to a 50-year struggle. We're fortunate to have with us Dr. Champa Alutwira, who will give a presentation on prevention of re-establishment in Sri Lanka. Dr. Alutwira she's a medical doctor and currently the director of the anti-malaria campaign in the Ministry of Health and Indigenous Medicine in Colombo, Sri Lanka. She has held multiple senior positions earlier in her career, including as Director of Non-Communicable Diseases, Director of Primary Healthcare Services, and several other senior portfolios. We're very grateful and privileged to have you available, and we thank you for your time, Champa. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, but it's a very small screen. You need to enlarge it, please, Champa. You're in presenter. Oh, yeah. You've stopped sharing now.
Can you please swap the presenter view? So you can do it by, you can click display setting in the upper side of the screen. It's display setting here.
There we are.
Right.
Well done. Excellent. Thank you, Champa. Please proceed.
Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity. If I present a brief background on the country, Sri Lanka is an island in the Indian Ocean, just south of India, and in the tropical zone just above the equator. Sri Lanka has a population of 22 million and is the largest lower middle income country in the malaria endemic tropics to achieve elimination. When malaria was endemic, the dominant species was Plasmodium vivax with falciparum, increasing in numbers during epidemics. The other species were rare. The main vector here is an Culicifaces, and there are several secondary vectors which are much less efficient and only transmit during epidemics. Here is the history of organized malaria control and elimination, which I just described from 1911. In 1963, we had only 17 cases. 6 were indigenous and 11 were imported. The resurgence occurred during 1967 to 69. But in 1968, we had more than 500,000 cases annually. The last case of malaria was reported in October of 2012, and WHO certification was given in 2016. This bar graph shows the imported malaria cases by species after elimination was achieved. On average, around 50 imported cases per year, mostly vivax and falciparum, but also some ovarian malaria cases are being reported. In 2018, we had 1 case of introduced vivax malaria, and in 2021, a transfusion-induced case of falciparum malaria from a blood donor who had returned from Africa. I think you can see the slide. High-risk population, security forces, personnel returning from UN peacekeeping missions, gem traders, other businessmen, pilgrims, seafarers, resettled communities, and etc. There are several high-risk populations that we have identified. We have developed specific strategies and mechanisms to target interventions to each of these high-risk population groups. Strong collaboration with the Ministry of Defense has helped us to deal with one of the major sources of imported malaria, which is armed forces personnel returning from UN peacekeeping missions. We provide chemoprophylaxis before they leave, and on their return, we maintain registers and screen them regularly with help from the Army and Air Force medical teams. Similarly, to many risk groups, we are providing chemoprophylaxis by many other ministries are also frequently communicated and collaborated for different risk groups, and UN agencies also frequently collaborated and communicated with us. When collaboration with UNHCR and IOM, anti-malaria campaign is informed of incoming groups, and screening is performed on arrival and kept under surveillance later on. This is our organization structure of the anti-malaria campaign headquarters. And this is the organization structure of malaria program at the implementation level. Sri Lanka's national malaria program is implemented through a vertical structure at the national level, which is well integrated into the provincial health administration for implementation. The vertical campaign's role is technical guidance, policy and strategy development, and monitoring and evaluation, whereas human resources and finances for implementation is through the provincial health system. Malaria is a forgotten disease. Most of the junior health staff have not treated any malaria patient. There are the strategies used to maintain passive and active case detection. For example, awareness rising in clinicians to reduce diagnosis delays by issuing guidelines and circulars, frequent awareness programs, and holding sessions at college annual sessions. Almost all the staff, including lab technicians, field officers, are trained annually and do periodic malaria microscopy training to public and private sector laboratory technicians and ECAM certified malaria microscopists in the country. Time from onset of the illness to first contact to malaria diagnosis monitored in each and every malaria case, and data reviewed monthly and annually. On case investigation and response is mentioned here. Actually, while the case management is going on, case investigation is begun and contact tracing, parasitological and entomological surveillance are started within 48 hours to prevent the spread of the parasites. Reactive parasitic surveillance is conducted to confirm whether the patient has spread the infection locally, and slides are taken from the people who were within 1 kilometer radius of the patient, and surveillance is done at all the areas where patient resided night stays for last 14 days. Reactive entomological surveillance is also done similarly within 1 kilometer radius of the index patient. We have 17 routine sentinel sites in mostly endemic areas, and they are being conducted either monthly or quarterly. The site selection is based on risk of imputation and receptivity. Quality is checked by entomologists and regional malaria officers with bioassays and supervision, and in case of an outbreak. Vector control will be implemented in a targeted, and buffer stocks of insecticides are maintained up to date. Our overall challenges are mainly in financing, cessation of funding from previous major funding sources, as example GFAT, country's economic crisis reduced all national budgets. That means our local currency devalued and we are in the crisis situation. So GOSL funds are very, very limited. And other challenges, presence of recently introduced Anopheles stephens in 2 districts in the northern regions, and frequent transfers of health staff, especially medical officers and the others. And other innovative strategies and policies, if I talk, monitoring delays in diagnosis and keeping physicians informed, outbreak simultaneous exercise conducted in the field, continuous evaluation of existing strategies and introduce new ones. Those are the challenges. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Dr. Champa, we should be and we do thank you for that excellent presentation and overview. You speak with the benefit of having been at the coalface, and Sri Lanka has experienced firsthand the challenges of prevention of re-establishment, and has learned many valuable lessons that the rest of us should be listening to and benefit from and apply. So for those insights and the remarks about challenges such as financing, I mean, countries face huge pressures with different pressures on the available finances in a country. So to try and justify continued malaria surveillance and control in a country that has reached elimination, that is always a serious challenge with many trade-offs. And then of course, the additional challenge now, urban vectors such as Anopheles-Stevens eye, where presumably many of your workers returning from overseas, tourists, people that may be infected with malaria, come to the urban centers, and this is where Anopheles-Stevens eye now is establishing itself. So you're not quite clear in the clear yet, and you need to maintain that vigilance. I think you can stop sharing, Dr. Champa, but again, from all of us, many, many thanks, genuine thanks for that presentation. So it's now a question and answer session. Our speakers have been very good at responding by giving typewritten responses, so the questions have dwindled, but we have some pre-submitted questions. Let me jump off with that. So a question to Alkan. For the benefit of our colleagues here in Asia, many of whom are from countries where Plasmodium knowlesi and other zoonotic species remain a challenge and will do so after elimination of falciparum and vivax, could you summarize for us the position of WHO on elimination certification of countries that have maintained and been very good in keeping zero local transmission of falciparum and vivax for 3 years, but they have lingering cases of knowlesi, cynomolgi, etc. What's the WHO take on signing that malaria-free certification? Comments from you, please, Alkan.
Thank you very much. At the moment, the only country with this challenge is Malaysia, which interrupted transmission of all so-called human species, 4 species of malaria in 2018, and already even applied to WHO officially with request to initiate certification of malaria elimination. However, Malaysia reports thousands to 3,000 P-nolicide cases every year, and even deaths from P-nolicide. And there is importation from Malaysia of P-nolicide to other countries also. So what WHO did, so we commissioned a review of the literature of, to understand if there is a transmission, vector-borne transmission from human to human of P-nolicide. So there is, well, the review showed that there is no evidence of that. However, considering that big number of cases, that huge amount of P-nolicide cases, we conducted, that time there was a malaria elimination certification panel. That is the advisory body to WHO, which advises and recommends to Director General of WHO whether to certify country or not certify the country. And the conclusion they came was that if the country reports that big amount of cases, certification is not possible. Because to certify country which reports 3,000 malaria cases, which report deaths from malaria, it doesn't seem to be kind of very comfortable. Now, the conclusion they came that certification is possible if the number of other known so-called human species is negligible. So what is negligible is a question also, which we are trying to identify ourselves. So one of the solutions could be like less than 10 cases, or that, but this is arbitrary decision. So then the issue was discussed at another advisory group in WHO, Malaria Policy Advisory Group, which agreed with the conclusion of Malaria Elimination Certification Panel. So what we did back in April, that we informed the Ministry of Health of Malaysia about the conclusion of these committees. And we agreed to develop a joint action plan on how to deal with P-nolicide issue. And this in June, high-level mission to Malaysia is planned with the members, with the team will consist of members of staff members from GMP, Elimination Unit, but also advisory group to WHO. Now it is called Technical Advisory Group on Malaria Elimination and Certification to find some solutions. So at the moment, if the country is reporting a lot of cases of P-nolicide, we cannot certify this country. Another problem is that we ourselves don't have a solution for P-nolicide. So we don't, I mean, there are no tools to deal with P-nolicide issue in countries. So yeah, so now the situation is that after high-level mission, we will come up with the action plan for Malaysia, and then we'll move from there. So so again, this is the only country, but we realized that the issue of P-nolicide will really expand, because there was information of P-nolicide cases in Thailand, but I mean in a much less extent, like 10 to 12 cases. And this will be growing. So we are working with the team, with the entire GMP, because it's not only elimination unit subject. So we involve all other units to find some solutions, which we don't have at the moment, unfortunately. So I don't know if I could answer your question.
No, you have, and you answered it very thoroughly. Very, very interesting. A good, solid, thorough response there. Thank you for that, Alkan. Very frustrating for Malaysia. Feel very sorry for them. But I mean, you know, Nolzai and the others, they pop up all over the place, Indonesia, Cambodia, all over, but in much lower numbers. So I need to read up a bit more about that. Why is Malaysia hit so hard in relation to the other countries? What makes Malaysia so different? You know, is the level of interaction and exposure of humans to non-human primates higher? Where and why? So interesting questions that I don't know the answers of. I'm sure there are answers to be had there. Very interesting. I'd like to read up about that. So let's go to Basil.
Sorry, Leo, can I just add one thing?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Thank you very much. So when we discussed this with the Minister of Health, I have to say that they were very, I mean, they were frustrated, but they understood actually also the position of WHO. And well, you mentioned what can be the reason. One of the reasons could be also deforestation, for example, which make it the contact, you know, with monkeys very close. So, but again, no kind of evidence and no answer to the questions. Thank you.
Still remains at speculation. Very interesting. Thank you for that wonderful, clear response. Thank you, Elkan. So here's a question for Basil. South Africa and some neighboring states have opted for relying primarily on IRS for vector control instead of ITNs. Can you briefly summarize why did South Africa decide to go the IRS route, which is more expensive? And then, and also maybe just give us a bit of a picture of, you know, how extensive is this IRS coverage? How many households does South Africa typically treat? And you know, is it still a blanket IRS in all households throughout the endemic area, across all areas where malaria occurs? Or is there a movement towards more selective spot spraying? Just some comments, if you don't mind, Basil. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leo. Yes, so IRS was essentially born in South Africa as a malaria control technology. So it predates the development of ITNs. And so by the time ITNs became a new vector control technology, I think our IRS programs were already so developed and so embedded that it was very much a case of, well, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. And so we have always had an IRS approach to controlling malaria in South Africa. And that's worked extremely well for us. In fact, I think you can safely say, and I hope Jayshree would agree with me, that it is thanks really to very intensive IRS over many decades, we mean really many decades, that we are able to think about elimination in South Africa, because the IRS program has been 95% plus effective in reducing incidence to a point where we can really think about eliminating malaria. And so with that in mind, and given that South Africa is now so low incidence, a mass bed net distribution program is just not indicated for South Africa because of the low incidence of locally acquired malaria. That doesn't mean to say that bed nets are not available. They are. And in some instances, they are distributed. For example, we have recommended recently that migrant communities should perhaps be issued with bed nets because they don't have fixed abodes that can be treated by IRS. IRS is important to us too because it enables resistance management, which is a critical issue for us here in Southern Africa, given our very highly resistant Anopheles fenestis, resistance to pyrethroid insecticides mainly. But the IRS programs have become very heterogeneous. So we don't just do wild sort of blanket IRS anymore. There is quite a bit of stratification going on, quite a bit of targeted IRS going on. So high risk areas are given sort of the blanket treatment. Lower risk areas are given a more targeted treatment. And we are now also considering reactive foci clearing type control for very low incidence areas or very low risk areas. So it's now become quite heterogeneous. So, you know, I think the program is responsive to stratification and to risk classification as well. So I hope that pretty much covers what you're asking. I think at the moment we are probably covering a good few 100,000 households per year through our 3 endemic provinces. So over, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Basil. Yeah, personally, I'm a staunch supporter of IRS, and South Africa is a prime example of how effective IRS can be conducted with excellent results. And you pointed out there, South Africa was the pioneering nation going back to the 1930s, if I remember the literature correctly, initiating IRS at significant scale for malaria control, indoor residual spraying. So Basil, thank you for that. And then the transition to moving slightly away from blanket spraying, the work you guys did with Immo Kleinschmidt and so on in Mpumalanga, showing the benefits of more focal targeted spraying and so on. Good job in South Africa, well done. So Jayashree, a question for you, if you don't mind, if you're still there. Thank you for your patience.
No, I'm still here, thanks.
I hope you're still awake. Thank you, Jayashree.
Really.
If South Africa theoretically could seal its borders, local malaria transmission would probably disappear within 1 year. Bang, boom. But closing border movement is obviously not possible. So in addition to the border facilities that you already pointed out and mentioned and described, can you tell us a bit about other initiatives to reduce malaria in the border areas of South Africa? And I'm talking, really looking at cross-border, other side of the South African side, such as in the neighboring provinces of Mozambique. Is that international cross-border collaboration bringing mutual benefits to the countries involved? Maybe just give us a broad overview in a minute or so, if you don't mind, Jayashree.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. If we could seal off our borders, we'd have a major impact. I think COVID showed that when we have the lockdowns, the number of cases decreased. So yeah, but it's not going to happen. But for sure, being able to collaborate with your neighbors, being able to have harmonized and synchronized interventions has been critical. Being able to make sure that if you spray on South African side, they're spraying on the Mozambican side as well. They're using the same interventions, the same, or they know what mosquitoes, what the insecticide resistance is, sharing. And that's the other thing that we want to know, where the sources or sinks are. So if we know that they're coming from, and I'm going to use Mozambique as an example, if they're coming from Tet, for example, you tell them that we're getting a whole lot of cases, you need to intensify that. So it's really just working very closely with your neighbors. And South Africa, Mozambique, and Eswatini have, I think, the model for a regional malaria control initiative in terms of LSDI, which is now known as Masaswa. And it's very much on that. It's harmonizing, standardizing interventions, having open communication and knowing where the cases are coming from, so knowing how to target. So it's really not regarding malaria control as country specific, but a region, and you all work together. And I think that's the only way that we're going to get to elimination. Over.
Yeah, no, well pointed out. And again, congratulations to Southern Africa for a job well done there for attacking malaria at a regional level, holding hands, different nations, and jointly tackling a common problem with magnificent results. I mean, that Masaswa example was preceded by a similar initiative over a decade or so, earlier in the 2000s, with wonderful results. There were hiccups and problems that caused a resurgence, and then the Masaswa initiative was implemented again with dramatic results, which demonstrates very clearly, unequivocally, the benefits of neighboring countries jointly planning and implementing malaria control operations. It works. So thank you for that, Jayashree. Kim, we have a question for you. Given your previous roles in WHO and experience in working with not just malaria, but also NTDs and others, as you wonderfully pointed out, may I ask you to comment on the merit of perhaps integrating vector control staff and services for malaria prevention and arbovirus control in a post-malaria elimination setting. I always worry about, the incentive to maintain expensive malaria surveillance funding and programs and staffing and interventions is at risk if there's no immediate threat. But if one can integrate it with what you were promoting as a bigger picture, embracing multiple public health challenges, maybe there's economy of scale that benefits multiple interventions. Any thoughts on that, Kim?
Well, maybe just a few. I think as I tried to point out, like the integration, and as you said, is all about trying to improve our resource use, decrease costs, improve efficiency. But that's only going to happen if it actually makes biological and epidemiological sense. So when it comes to arboviral diseases and malaria, obviously they're different vectors. And obviously those vectors have different behaviors. They breed in different sites. We have different approaches to monitoring the density of anopheles than we do for the density of culicines. So in some cases, it may make sense to integrate in the staffing, that you may want to have just one single vector surveillance and vector control unit with staff who understand the range of different activities that would be involved. But it may be integration at that level as opposed to thinking that you can integrate trapping methods, for example. There's beyond just the vectors, then there's also the integration of the human surveillance component. I think that's where it might be a little bit easier to think about how you would integrate malaria and arboviral diseases, because fever is a great starting point. Argentina has one of the best approaches, I think, to surveillance of febrile diseases that I've seen. And fever is the entry point. There is an approach to diagnosis that takes advantage of understanding which diseases are most prominent. So Argentina has been certified malaria-free, so it's not the first diagnosis that you would do. So they start by looking for dengue, and then they have a series of other diagnostic tools that they'll use. If they rule all those out, and it's not an arbovirus or other common cause of fever, then they will look at malaria, particularly also if there's been a travel history. So this is a way to use fever as an entry point into human surveillance to look for not only malaria, but other potential causes of febrile disease like arboviruses.
Great, thank you for that response, Kim. I think we're starting to lose audience members, but let me ask Champa. Dr. Champa, a quick question for you, and it relates to the question to Kim. Clearly, there's a need to maintain a basic core of entomological expertise, infrastructure, and operational preparedness to undertake surveillance and response against any re-establishment possibility. Can you give us a couple of comments on how Sri Lanka deals with this requirement of maintaining that core set of equipment, skills, staffing, etc., and what is the comparative budget allocation post-elimination relative to pre-elimination? Is it less expensive post-elimination? Is it as costly, or is it even more costly to maintain that preparedness and readiness to do surveillance and response? Any comments on that, Champa?
Leo, sorry, but Dr. Champa is not here.
Oh, okay.
4 minutes ago.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. All right, let me check the. Now I seem to have lost. Okay, let me quickly, I'm sorry, just give me a moment here. So we have 3 questions left in the Q&A box. Basil, I think this one maybe, if you're still with us, it's the first question in the chat box, in the Q&A box. And it says, which level does the risk and receptivity relate to in stratification of risk and receptivity? Is it village, town, district, or province level? This is very difficult to answer, I suspect. It depends what you're talking about. So vector distribution covers more than a village level. So do you want to say anything there, Basil? Or is it, one would have to sit down and look at each specific parameter according to its own merits and stratify accordingly? Any comments from you, Basil?
Thanks, Leo. Yes, I would agree with you there. So in South Africa, when we're thinking about stratification from an entomological surveillance perspective, then we would do it really by district. And that would be our chosen level of giving indications about risk and receptivity. But I mean, that's very different from the stratification and the risk system for in terms of case surveillance. I don't know if Jayshree wants to comment on that. And how it's affected by the country's economy. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a direct link. In South Africa, certainly malaria is, or it is definitely the poorer communities who are most affected by malaria, but that's really throughout all of our endemic provinces. So, when it comes to stratifying, we don't really look at economic indicators. It's very much about which districts are potentially affected and what their level of risk is. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Basil. Jayshree, do you want to venture a comment, or you?
I just want to say something quickly. Definitely, we found the level to go to if you're trying to do case management interventions and foci clearing is to get to the most granular that you can. So, we've tried to get down to locality level for your stratification because it just makes it easier. You can then figure out your resources. So you try to get to as low as possible would be my recommendation.
That's a good approach. Yeah, no, thank you. That's a very sensible response. So, Abdul, your question here is about the definition of negligible in relation to null's-eye non-human primate malarias. I think Alkan responded to that, how long is a piece of string and where's the threshold? Clearly Malaysia has a lot of null's-eye infections. Cambodia doesn't have a lot of infections, but still it's very difficult to pin down an exact figure. It's impossible to say less than 100 or more than 100 cases. So very difficult to say. It also depends on population size of the country, etc., etc. But I think Alkan dealt with that particular question. Here's a last. Okay, there's another one question. Let me pose Maxine Whitaker's question. Maxine, if I understand correctly, you're asking about the role of rural communities in particular in the elimination phase. What can communities do to facilitate, enhance, improve elimination? And I'm assuming, fundamentally it boils down to please use your bed nets. And if you have fever, please go to a medical facility and be tested. Does anyone want to, Jayshree, Kim, any responses from you about community participation in elimination initiatives?
I'm going to quickly jump in there, Leo, just to say that I think absolutely critical. They are the last line, really. So they need to be most aware. So if they know communities are coming in, they need to be able to go to them and ask them to get tested for malaria. They need to play a more active role. They almost need to become an extension of the malaria control program. They need to be able to monitor vector breeding sites and be able to report to malaria control program that they think there's something happening. So they really just become an extension of the control program, and that they just need to be more involved and more aware of what elimination is and what they, and what the role is in getting us to that and the advantages to it. So it's really a lot more communication with them and making sure that they feel part of the initiative. Otherwise, we're never going to get there. So that's been my experience I've noticed so far. Over.
Yeah, no, absolutely sensible response there, but it also depends on, your National Malaria Control Program and its ability to incentivize, inform local communities and gain that level of collaboration and commitment from the local communities. So, one's just got to keep plugging away and try and make sure that you get that sensitivity and commitment to do your bit. The last question before we wrap up relates again to your line of work, Jayshree, and the use of the single low dose of primaquine. So I'm assuming, if I remember correctly, it's 0.25 milligrams per kilogram. Did you experience any challenges regarding G6PD when using primaquine?
No, not at all. We did a clinical trial before we did this, and we definitely found no effects of it, and that's why it's recommended for use in all areas, because the risk for G6PD related hemolysis is very low with the low dosage.
All right. Okay. So it remains for me to thank our speakers sincerely. A warm, heartfelt thank you for your time and effort and responsiveness. I also would like to thank our technical team working in the background. That's Dr. Porn, sitting in Singapore, Wulan and Popo, for enabling this webinar to take place, quietly plugging away in the background. And to our audience members for very enthusiastic participation quietly in the background with comments in the chat box especially. So to everyone, many thanks again for your participation. There's the poll, if you don't mind. If you wouldn't mind just spending literally 1 or 2 minutes, probably more like 1 minute, to respond to these poll questions, we'd be very grateful. So it's just clicking on the appropriate box. It gives us a sense if we're kind of doing things sort of right and where we can improve. That would be great. Thank you so much, everyone.